Chinese vaccine, okay? Obviously, this is not the real Chinese vaccines bottles, okay? The Chinese vaccine bottles is not bottles. They are delivered at injections. So with the needles already there. So you don't need to buy separate needles for the Chinese vaccine. One needle, one dose. Okay, let's explain how vaccine works first. Get a rough idea.
During a viral infection, the virus attaches itself to a human cell using its spikes. Following entry to the cell, it uses the host cell's machinery to replicate, producing viral proteins and genetic material. These are then assembled into new viral particles, which are released as the host cell dies. New viral particles again infect more cells, destroying body tissues, producing symptoms. Infected cells alert the immune system by displaying pieces of viral proteins on their surface. By doing so, infected cells are said to present the viral antigen to certain immune cells, namely cytotoxic T cells, and thus activate them. At the same time, debris of dead cells and viral particles themselves are picked up by so-called professional antigen-presenting cells, of which dendritic cells are most effective. Dendritic cells patrol body tissues, continuously sampling their environment for intruders. After capturing the antigen, dendritic cells quickly leave the tissue for the nearest lymph node, where they present the antigen to another group of immune cells known as helper T cells. Viral particles also activate B cells in lymph nodes. These groups of immune cells work together to mount two types of immunity specific to the viral antigen: cell-mediated immunity and antibody-mediated immunity. The process, however, may take up to a couple of weeks, during which time the person is sick and the virus will have destroyed a vast number of cells. Vaccines deliver viral antigens to trigger immune responses without causing the disease. The events of a vaccine-induced immune response are similar to that induced by a natural infection, although some types of vaccines may induce only antibody-mediated immunity and may therefore be less effective. The immune process can sometimes produce symptoms similar to a mild infection, even though there is none. As the lymph nodes near the injection site start producing antibodies, they may become swollen and tender for a few days. These are signs that the vaccine is working. Many existing vaccines contain a weakened or inactivated virus. Because the whole virus is used, these vaccines require extensive safety testing. Attenuated vaccines may still cause disease in people with compromised immune systems. Inactivated vaccines only induce antibody-mediated immunity. Subunit vaccines contain only part of the virus, usually a spike protein. These vaccines cannot cause disease, but they may not be seen as a threat to the immune system and therefore may not elicit the desired immune response. For this reason, certain substances called adjuvants are usually added to stimulate the antigen-presenting cells to pick up the vaccine. A subunit vaccine may also consist of empty virus shells without genetic material. Having a typical size and shape of a pathogen, these vaccines may not require adjuvants to be perceived as danger, but they can be difficult to produce. Nucleic acid vaccines contain genetic information for making the viral antigen instead of the antigen itself. DNA vaccines introduce viral DNA into the cell's nucleus, where it is transcribed into mRNA. The mRNA is translated into viral spike protein in the cytoplasm. The protein is then displayed on the cell's surface, just like with other types of vaccines. Naked DNA vaccines require a special delivery method to reach the cell's nucleus. Alternatively, a harmless, unrelated virus may be used as a vehicle to deliver the DNA. In this case, the vaccine is also known as a viral vector vaccine. For example, the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine uses a chimpanzee adenovirus as a vector. The adenoviral genome is modified to remove viral genes, and the coronavirus spike gene is added. This way, the viral vector cannot replicate or cause disease, but it acts as a vehicle to deliver the DNA. The reason a non-human adenovirus is used is because most people may have been exposed to human adenovirus and have immunity against it. The immunity could destroy the vehicle before it can deliver the DNA and thus blunt the vaccine's effectiveness. DNA vaccines have raised concerns about the possibility of viral DNA integration into human genome. However, studies in animal models have shown that integration frequency is well below the frequency of natural, spontaneous gene mutations. mRNA vaccines introduce mRNA that contains information for making the viral protein. mRNA molecules are delivered within a lipid covering that will fuse with the cell membrane. Once inside the cytoplasm, the mRNA is translated into viral antigen, which is then displayed on the cell surface. Unlike DNA vaccines, mRNA vaccines are extremely unlikely to integrate into human genome, but they are fragile and require uninterrupted cold chain for transportation and storage.
Okay, so this is an overview of all types of vaccines, and the Chinese take all the path. So China has developed at least 12 vaccines. At the moment, 5 of them are permitted to use within China, and there's only one permitted to use by WHO. Okay, so that is the situation in China. Let's look at a British medical journal. Again, the where you can find it is at the bottom there. Now, there's about a dozen Chinese vaccines candidates. 5 have received emergency use approval in China. Okay, and there as well as several other countries. So some countries, because they can't get the vaccines from American or German or United Kingdom, and so they have no choice but to approve the Chinese vaccine in order to use in their country. That Sinopharm is a state-owned enterprise, and they work on 2 different vaccines. Most of, as I say, the Chinese way is we don't know which way is the best. Okay, let's try all the ways. So, because they have sufficient people. But the unfortunate thing is China managed to control the virus by April. So the vaccines, when they are out for testing, they can't find a human sample. So the phase 3 has to be done outside of China. Because inside China, there's no point because there's no virus already. So there's another issue. One of those is based, now the current 5 which has been approved are all based on inactivated virus. So of all 3 requires 2 doses. So like what we are getting here, require for the American vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson requires only 1 dose. AstraZeneca, Pfizer, all require 2 doses. So are the Chinese vaccines. But there's another 4 which require 1 dose only. And that one have been used to immunize a remote area in China. Because it's so remote, getting 2 doses will be a large logistic problem. So they try that with one. Okay, so these are from that, giving a background of the situation there. And then the last point is all the vaccines developed by China only require normal fridge temperature, around -4 degrees. So this is a big advantage for use in other underdeveloped countries. Yes, Clifton?
know a lady here at UCA, Julia, from Bandung, Java, near Jakarta, and she says that the Indonesian government's using the Chinese one and it's been done a great job.
Yeah, we will cover that a little bit later on. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Okay, the Chinese vaccine situation. This is up to May 14, but up to the last Sunday, the Chinese has already administered 400 million doses within China. Sorry? This year, because all the vaccines is only available this year, except the United Kingdom approved the Pfizer vaccine in middle December last year. So that is the earliest approval. Almost all other countries had their vaccine approval only this year. So up to now, Chinese has already vaccinated 400 million. The number of vaccines initially is very slow, and then they speed up after the explosion of India, because the India gets so bad and China is so close. So suddenly they say, okay, we better hurry up. And Chinese exported about 60% of its manufacturing vaccines. Okay, some comparison.
This is the new one-dose COVID-19 vaccine from Johnson & Johnson. In early March, more than 6,000 doses were supposed to be shipped to the city of Detroit, Michigan. But the mayor said, no thanks.
Moderna and Pfizer are the best. And I am going to do everything I can to make sure the residents of the city of Detroit get the best.
He was referring to these numbers, the vaccine's efficacy rates. The vaccines from Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna have super high efficacy rates, 95 and 94%. But Johnson & Johnson, just 66. And if you only look at these numbers, it's natural to think that these vaccines are worse than these. But that assumption is wrong. These numbers are arguably not even the most important measure of how effective these vaccines are. To understand what is, you first have to understand what vaccines are even supposed to do. A vaccine's efficacy rate is calculated in large clinical trials, when the vaccine is tested on tens of thousands of people. Those people are broken into two groups. Half get the vaccine and half get a placebo. Then they're sent out to live their lives while scientists monitor whether or not they get COVID-19 over several months. In the trial for Pfizer-BioNTech, for example, there were 43,000 participants. In the end, 170 people were infected with COVID-19. And how those people fall into each of these groups determines a vaccine's efficacy. If the 170 were evenly split, that would mean you're just as likely to get sick with the vaccine as without it. So it would have a 0% efficacy. If all 170 were in the placebo group and 0 people who got the vaccine were sick, the vaccine would have an efficacy of 100%. With this particular trial, there were 162 in the placebo group and just 8 in the vaccine group. It means those who had the vaccine were 95% less likely to get COVID-19. The vaccine had a 95% efficacy. Now, this doesn't mean if 100 people are vaccinated, 5 of them will get sick. Instead, that 95% number applies to the individual. So each vaccinated person is 95% less likely than a person without a vaccine to get sick each time they're exposed to COVID-19. And every vaccine's efficacy rate is calculated in the same way. But each vaccine's trial might be done in very different circumstances.
So one of the biggest considerations here when we look at these numbers is the timing in which these clinical trials were performed.
This is the number of daily COVID-19 cases in the US since the pandemic began. The Moderna trial was done completely in the US, here in the summer. The Pfizer-BioNTech trial was primarily based in the US too, and at the same time. Johnson & Johnson, however, held their US trial at this time when there were more opportunities for participants to be exposed to infections. And most of their trial took place in other countries, primarily South Africa and Brazil. And in these other countries, not only were case rates high, but the virus itself was different. The trials took place as variants of COVID-19 emerged and became dominant infections in these countries, variants that are more likely to get participants sick. In South Africa, most of the cases in the Johnson & Johnson trial were that of the variant, not the original strain that was in the US over the summer. And despite that, it still significantly reduced infections.
If you're trying to make one-to-one head-to-head comparisons between vaccines, they need to have been studied in the same trial with the same inclusion criteria in the same parts of the world at the same time.
If we were to take Pfizer and Moderna's vaccine and redo their clinical trial at the same time that we did J&J's clinical trial, we might see quite different efficacy numbers for those.
These efficacy numbers really just tell you what happened in each vaccine's trial, not exactly what will happen in the real world. But many experts argue this isn't even the best number to judge a vaccine by anyway, because preventing any infection at all is not always the point of a vaccine.
The goal of a vaccine program for COVID-19 is not necessarily to get to COVID-0, but it's to tame this virus, to defang it, to remove its ability to cause serious disease, hospitalization, and death.
It helps to look at the different outcomes of an exposure to COVID-19 like this. The best case scenario is you don't get sick at all. The worst case is death. In between, there's being hospitalized, severe to moderate symptoms, or having no symptoms at all. In the absolute best circumstances, vaccines give you protection all the way to here. But realistically, that isn't the main objective of COVID-19 vaccines. The real purpose is to give your body enough protection to cover these possibilities. So if you do get an infection, it feels more like a cold than something you'd be hospitalized for. And this is one thing that every one of these COVID-19 vaccines do well. In all these trials, while some people in the placebo groups were hospitalized or even died from COVID-19, not one fully vaccinated person in any of these trials was hospitalized or died from COVID-19.
One thing that I wish that mayor would have understood was that all three vaccines have essentially 100% effectiveness in protecting from death.
The mayor of Detroit did backtrack and said he'd start taking Johnson & Johnson doses because it's still highly effective against what we care about most. Efficacy matters, but it doesn't matter the most. The question isn't which vaccine will protect you from any COVID infection, but which one will keep you alive or out of the hospital? Which one will help end the pandemic? And that's any of them.
The best vaccine right now for you is the one that you're offered.
With each shot that goes in someone's arm, we get closer to the end of this pandemic.
Okay, so that explains very well the scientific understanding of vaccines. Okay, so despite scientific, now we are moving into the politics. Okay, now we. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. For this one, because it's urgent, I will prepare the handout today and then send it out. The last two, I haven't got time. Probably I will do it during. Okay. Yes, I think these two videos is very good to share, to let people understand what does it mean by vaccines. So, for your knowledge, I will be getting my vaccines next Wednesday, the first dose. I got a call from my GP and say, hey, time to come here and shut up. And say, yes, I will.
Are you getting the Chinese version?
No, I love to get the Chinese version, but it's not available here. So I will be getting the AstraZeneca. It's fine. Have you done that? Oh, you did one. Yeah, okay, yes.
My wife and I have AstraZeneca, no real effect whatsoever.
Good, good, good. Okay. So I encourage everybody get immunized because that's how we can get everybody safe.
One interesting point to me from that first video you showed, they were saying if you got the vaccine, you sometimes got a reaction as if you were getting
As if, yeah.
And that shows that the vaccine is working.
But you don't get, it's still working.
Yeah. But if you don't get any sort of symptoms or reactions,
You still,
I wonder, is it still working?
Yeah, it's still working.
Reactions.
It's still working. Yeah, it's still working. Because some, just like a flu, some people get it, have a large reaction, some get it, but you don't know you get it. So it doesn't matter. Okay, real world data. Look at what happens in the real world.
Hi everyone, welcome to Difference Frames the World, a channel to find a real China. On May 7, 2021, the WHO approved Sinopharm Beijing's vaccine for emergency use. Another vaccine from China, Sinovac's CoronaVac, is still pending approval. For quite a long time, the Western media keep criticizing China for its lack of transparency. They constantly challenge the low efficacy of the Sinovac vaccine, especially. All the phase 3 trials of the Chinese vaccines were conducted in other countries, and China could not control the data collection and disclosure. Take the trial in Brazil as an example. The phase 3 trial participants were all medical workers who are more likely to acquire the virus. Sinovac's phase 3 trial showed a 50% efficacy rate, which was widely cited by various media for questioning the effectiveness of Chinese vaccines. However, few media mentioned that Sinovac could offer 100% protection against death, meaning the vaccinated person will most likely survive even if he or she acquired the virus. For vaccines, clinical trials are one thing. The real-life result is another. In February 2021, a small city in southeastern Brazil, Ceará, launched an unprecedented campaign. And in just 2 months, nearly every eligible adult in town has been vaccinated with China's Sinovac vaccine. What is the situation of the city today? On May 7th, the Wall Street Journal detailed the current status of the small town. Compared to the peak of the outbreak in March, Ceará's infection rate has dropped by 75%, and among those who received 2 doses of the vaccine, there have been no deaths due to the side effects. Life is slowly returning to normal. It also shows that the Sinovac vaccine is effective against both the new coronavirus and the P1 mutant strain that swept Brazil. Officials and people in the small town are now excited. Mayor Leo Capitelli praised the Chinese vaccine very highly. The Wall Street Journal also wrote in its report, the test, conducted in Ceará, offers hope to countries around the world that mass vaccination has worked. It also provides new evidence of the effectiveness of the Sinovac vaccine. Sinovac's CoronaVac vaccine is still under review by the WHO. According to local health department estimates, at least 60% of new coronavirus infections in Ceará in March 2021 were caused by the P1 strain. Against this backdrop, Brazil's top vaccine research institute, the Butantan Institute, has joined forces with the local government and hospital in Ceará to launch Project S, aiming to protect the local population's health, and at the same time, test Sinovac vaccine in real life. Science News, a leading U.S. academic journal, analyzed Ceará as a perfect test site. First of all, Ceará's proximity to the Butantan Institute and the University of São Paulo makes it an excellent geographic location. In addition, the small town has a small population of 45,000, of which about 30,000 are adults, and the infection rate is relatively high. When Project S was launched in February of this year, the team at the Butantan Institute set a goal of vaccinating at least 80% of the city's residents over the age of 18. The vaccine they chose was the CoronaVac vaccine made by Sinovac from China. Previously, the Sinovac vaccine had a rocky fate in Brazil, once entangled in a political battle. Doria, the governor of Sao Paulo state, who intends to run for the next presidency, said publicly last October that the Sinovac vaccine was the safest and most promising. Then in November, a volunteer died in a vaccine trial. Brazil's National Health Surveillance Agency issued a statement saying there were serious adverse reactions to the vaccine, which prompted foreign media to exaggerate the story. Brazilian President Bolsonaro, nicknamed Tropical Trump, also spoke out against the Sinovac vaccine during this period. However, it turned out that the death of the volunteer was irrelevant to the vaccine. According to many media, the decision of the Brazilian National Health Surveillance Agency to suspend the vaccine may be related to the political tug-of-war in the Brazilian political arena. Despite the harsh public opinion on the Chinese vaccine, the Butantan Institute officially started Project S in February. According to the Wall Street Journal, this is a special experiment. Officials in Ceará said that most surprisingly, almost every adult agreed to the injection. According to a poll conducted in Brazil last December, half of those surveyed said they would refuse to receive any vaccine made in China. Many people thought they were guinea pigs, but it turned out to be a blessing. From February to April, nearly every eligible adult in the city received the Sinovac vaccine in just 2 months. Except for minors under the age of 18, adult women who were pregnant or breastfeeding, and others with serious health problems, 27,700 people were eligible for the vaccine, and 27,160 of them received the Coxsackie vaccine, a 98% vaccination rate. So what are the results of this vaccination campaign? Mayor Capitelli told the Wall Street Journal, "The numbers speak for themselves. We made it." Of course, the numbers speak for themselves. The number of new confirmed cases in Ceará peaked in February at 706. The number of infections then began to decline, 692 in March, and a sharp drop in April, with only 235 confirmed cases. According to the Sao Paulo state government, 6 people died of COVID-19 after vaccination during the program's inoculation period from mid-February to mid-April. 5 of them received only 1 dose, and the 6th one developed symptoms shortly after the 2nd dose. Researchers believe the patient was already infected at the time of the 2nd dose. Of those who did not receive the vaccine, 14 died. In addition, the Wall Street Journal mentioned that this result could also indicate that the Sinovac vaccine is effective against the P1 mutant strain. Lucia Elaine Caldano, an administrator at Ceará Hospital's intensive care unit, told the Wall Street Journal in May that only 1 person has been on a ventilator in the past 3 weeks. At the beginning of May, not a single bed was in use at the Santa Casa Hospital in Ceará, and the city's basic healthcare unit. The number of people waiting for intensive care unit beds had dropped to 0. Life in Ceará is gradually returning to normal. The economy is also starting to recover. Business is beginning to return to normal, with more than half of the hotel rooms filled. Mayor Capitelli said several textile mills and other companies have approached the government about doing business in Ceará because the local population has been vaccinated, reducing the risk of work stoppages due to the outbreak. In addition, Ceará's reputation for Project S has helped attract businesses. "Our little town will be the golden boy of the region," Sao Paulo state, Capitelli said confidently. But even so, local authorities are asking people to wear masks and keep their social distance. This trial in Ceará, however, is not over. It is still in the follow-up phase. Ethel Maciel, an epidemiologist at the Federal University of Espírito Santo, attributed the drop in the number of COVID-19 cases in Ceará to an apparent impact of vaccination. Science News said Project S would continue for another year, tracking any issues that arise. For example, how long the vaccine can provide protection is critical to helping Brazil and other parts of the world find a way out of the pandemic. For the Sinovac vaccine, the WHO report also confirmed its effectiveness. Dozens of countries are using it to vaccinate their citizens, and there are no deaths reported that are related to the side effects of the Chinese vaccine. Sinovac and Sinopharm vaccines can deal with the mutations found in Britain, South Africa, and Brazil more efficiently than other vaccines on the market. However, their effectiveness has proven to be lower against the mutated variants than against the non-mutated viruses. According to Zhong Nanshan, China's scientists and researchers are working hard at improving the vaccines to fight the variant strains. There is little research on the effectiveness of Chinese vaccines against the double variant or triple variant viruses found in India. Yet, one study shows that they are not the most dangerous strains, and the Chinese inactivated vaccines should still be effective against them. When the WHO announced that it would conduct the final review of the 2 Chinese vaccines, the EMA also expressed its intentions to approve Chinese vaccines promptly. The EU might probably embrace the Chinese vaccines because of the vaccine shortage, but in North America, we do not know whether ideology and politics still preponderate science. It is still uncertain whether Western nations, especially the Five Eyes and Quad countries, will approve Chinese vaccines or not. Put your opinions in the comments below.
Okay, so that's one test done in April this year and finished. And now this little town there have 0 infection. The hospital back to normal. ICU beds are there waiting for patients rather than patients waiting for beds. But again, it is a small town. The adult population is quite mobile, given that it is a very small town. So about half of the adult population do work outside of the town. So that about half of them get into dangerous zones, although they are in safe zone themselves. But looking at the data at the moment, it looks like the vaccine work for that community. So we will look at the another example here. As Cliff mentioned, it is found highly effective. This one is about Indonesia. So I'm copying some of the paragraphs from this link. This one is Sinovac. What about COVID-19 among health workers in Indonesia? So in Indonesia, there's 25,000 health workers in the capital city, Jakarta. And then they were in the 3rd phase trial. So this, the 3rd phase trial in Jakarta is performed on healthcare workers. It's not general population, it's a at-risk population where they perform the tests. And then after they received the 2nd dose and found that the vaccine protect 100% of them from death and 94% from hospitalization, as soon as 7 days after the second injection. So again, depending on how you judge the vaccine, whether you judge it by not being hospitalized or totally no symptoms, vaccine doesn't give you that kind of protection, but vaccines protect you from death 100% at the moment. So this is again the Indonesia data. In terms of the diplomacy, okay, the vaccine diplomacy, we noticed that in China, out of their 120 million doses, they sent out 109 doses outside of China. So about half. When I last read, it was 60%, but probably I got the wrong. And that is the data on March 2021. So I got the data into my brain in about April. China has already sent out about 60% of its manufactured vaccines, but now they are slowing down the export because of their own internal use. United States sent out 0, and President Biden just said the first batch of 200,000. No, it will be 2,000. What? I can't remember the unit. will be sent out by the end of June next month. So United States will start to export. India sent out quite a bit. India is very much trying to capture the vaccine market. Obviously, they haven't immunized their own people enough. European Union do send out a bit. For example, I think for us, AstraZeneca is from UK Oxford. We got the license, but at the beginning, you remember our Prime Minister said, how many by March? 2 million, 1 million? But it doesn't reach that number because you can't get the vaccine. People are not sending out the vaccine. At the moment, Pfizer vaccine is still in short supply here. So for us, we have the choice of the Johnson & Johnson. Is it Johnson & Johnson? No, Moderna. I think AstraZeneca. Yeah, AstraZeneca is, of course, because it's manufactured in Melbourne here. I think we haven't got any choice, but doesn't matter. United Kingdom, 0. Okay, so that is the so-called vaccine diplomacy. The developed nations doesn't send out quite a bit. Is the China and the Indian doing the bulk of the rest of the world. But obviously, for China, they are sending out Chinese vaccines. Okay. Okay, so that is what I prepare. So now we can go into the discussion sessions now.
Just one quick question on that graph. Those statistics for India, were they before or after the virus really started to hit?
You see,
I can see it's March, but
yeah, I think it's
March
before.
Before, right? Thank you.
Thank you.
If the borders in China, are they closed to people coming in?
Okay, is China's border closed? Answer is no. But if you have already been vaccinated by 2 doses of Chinese vaccine, you can go into China without quarantine. If you go into China with a positive test results, your carrier will be blocked to send further planes in for 2 weeks. So the carrier have to make sure your passengers are tested negative. And then for those who haven't got vaccinated, you have a 2 weeks quarantine in China, compulsory. And the hotel is, I remember initially it was paid by the Chinese government. I think now you have to pay it yourself. Yes. No, and there is an issue here is now, I think the WHO is suggesting that we have a so-called vaccine visa. So if you have been vaccinated, then you can go to a country without quarantine. Because if you quarantine 2 weeks and then come back and quarantine 2 weeks, you lost 1 month. So this quite a to us, it's not a problem, but for the people on business, it's a real issue, right? We have all the time to kill, but not they. So what the WHO is suggesting, okay, let's have a vaccine visa kind of. So if you have vaccine choice, then you can go to countries. Okay. But the issue is, that means I have to recognize your vaccine and you have to recognize my vaccine. So at the moment, China is recognizing the Chinese vaccine. So we know Chinese send out their vaccines to other countries. So in those countries, you have been vaccinated twice, then you can go to China without quarantine.
With the quarantine in China, is it done on the same basis as we do it here through hotels?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense, yes, it is using the hotel. No, in the sense that unlike here, you are not in contact, physical contact with any person. The Chinese hotel will have guards on the corridor, make sure nobody coming out. So you can come out. And the food will be delivered to you by persons in full PPE. Put it in front of your door, lock your door, and then he goes away. And then you are supposed to get it and 10 seconds after you hear the lock. So yes, it's still the same hotel, but it's a much stricter conditions. And the transport from the airport to the hotel is also by special vehicles, which are supposedly negative pressures. That means you can't, yes.
If they are had two of the AstraZeneca or two of the Pfizer vaccines, I would still not be permitted into China.
Yes, yeah, yeah. At the moment, until we recognize Chinese vaccines and Chinese recognize our vaccine.
So it's a border.
Yeah, so now the issue here now is if the WHO pull together and make it a worldwide, then one method to do so is all the vaccines approved by WHO will be on the list. So we have no problem with countries. So it's a matter of Chinese vaccine getting onto the list. Okay, so that's totally another issue. But if WHO can pull it through, then individual governments have to deal bilaterally, one by one, and that will be a big headache. So, but the Americans are blocking that. They are not going to recognize Chinese vaccine. Because of that, they are pulling WHO behind. Yes.
On the world news, I don't know if it was this morning or in recent mornings, I was saying, comparing the UK to the EU hasn't done very well at distributing the vaccines, but maybe they've got 400, 500, 600 million people, I don't know how many, 27 countries, but the UK has done a pretty good job of giving a lot of people our age.
The most vaccinated country in the world is Israel. It's 40-something%, I last read, but probably it's much higher now. There's one big issue in developed country, is those anti-vaccine persons. So even the government provide free vaccines, I doubt whether there will be sufficient persons in their country to reach the herd immunization threshold. The herd immunization threshold means approximately 80% of the people are vaccinated in your country. But the anti-vaccine community represent about 30% to 40% of their population. So is whether they can reach that is a real problem.
What's the advantage for the US to stop the WHO approving more of the Chinese?
Ideology. It's ideology, I think. I read it as ideology. He just
usually it's driven with the dollar behind it too, though.
But the dollar is the dollar is also a very interesting issue. Remember when India getting into the trouble at the beginning, asking United States to allow the raw material to be shipped over. Now we have now got President Biden said he supports the waiving of the IP for the COVID vaccines. But the issue is American has only got Moderna and Johnson & Johnson. But the bulk of the vaccine available in the world is Pfizer and AstraZeneca. So to them, giving up the IP is not the issue. But for the European Union, that's a big issue because there's a lot of money involved in there. And America is a very large country producing raw material for vaccines. So giving up the vaccines IP doesn't matter to them because they are making money from the raw material. So Americans are now agree, but the European is not going to agree, and that had to go to the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and to get that passed is very difficult because it needs 100% members to agree. So I don't think we can get 100% agree. So for that to pass is no easy task. Indian, African countries all suggested that we should mandate the COVID vaccine be IP free. For India, they have two of their own, but they're not very effective. So, but they have very large manufacturing capability. So if they can get the raw material and get the IP, they can be a very powerful force in shipping out vaccines. But for herd immunization in China, Chinese have 1.4 billion people. So, and that means they will need 2.4 billion doses for 2 doses. And to have them say at a 80% or 20%, 80 or 90% coverage, they themselves will require about 2 billion doses plus in order to reach that target. The current manufacturing capability of China is an annual capacity of about 1 billion. So if China doesn't ramp up its manufacturing capability, then it needs 2 years to vaccinate its own people.
Albert, how does China access the raw materials? Their own, or do they have to?
They have, China is a very large manufacturer of raw material as well. So a lot of the raw material made by India has actually come from China. But at the moment, the Indian is rejecting Chinese medicine as well. So again, ideology, that is very sad. I think in front of people's life, human lives, I don't think ideology should, but the politics is like that. Just like here, our Australian government is also heavily ideological. So it's not helping us anyway. Or incompetent. And both. And both. Yes, please.
In China, there can't be any anti-vaccination, right? Because they have no choice. They always say that you get the vaccine.
Now, the Chinese government rolling out vaccines also on a voluntary basis. So they are not forcing anybody to take vaccines. But there's always a but. For some organizations, like the bank, they require that bank tellers to all be vaccinated. And the bus company also require their drivers to be vaccinated. And in that case, they are forced to vaccinate by their employer rather than by themselves. And the vaccination in China is that as long as you can produce a Chinese identification, then you can get a free vaccination. And they have now extended this to any foreigners who are going to stay in China for more than three months. So yeah, you have a visa to stay in China for more than 3 months, you can get vaccinated free of charge. All vaccines in China free of charge. You just like normal, go to a vaccinating stations and then you line up, go in, have your vaccination come out, and then you get a little notice on your telephone, and then next time when the time up, beep, you'll go there again, get the second shot. So
when you say that 80% of people being vaccinated, here they're talking about not vaccinating people under the age of 15. So is it like that in China too, or are they vaccinating everybody?
It's still not vaccinating the under 18. Under 18. Yeah, at the moment. Yeah. But I think they will eventually vaccinate everybody. It is waiting for the third phase test result on the minors, because the bulk of the test population were adults. There's only a small test subjects being minors. They're waiting for that result. Now back to why China's vaccine get in so late. The Chinese started their vaccine program in about mid-February 2019, when they have already got the sequence DNA, and then they started the research, okay, all the work. And then they completed most of their data collection by December. So they submitted the data to WHO almost the same time as Pfizer and AstraZeneca. But WHO has the rule that if you come from a certified countries where your FDA, your Food and Drug Administration, is recognized as certified, then your vaccine will be rubber stamp chop and then go out. So they can do it within 10 days. Pfizer get their approval from WHO within 10 days. But the Chinese, after submitting, it takes 4 months to come out with the result, because they have to go through all the data again and even visit the manufacturing site, which they did in January 2021, but they have to do it again. So WHO rule need to be changed. Yes, at some time before, Chinese standard is not that high, but I think now Chinese standard has already catch up. So Chinese should be admitted into that country list where the Chinese submit the data, you rubber stamp. But at the moment, WHO doesn't rubber stamp Chinese vaccines. So there's only one vaccine approved, and there's another 2 coming. Hopefully, they say by the end of this month, hopefully the other 2 vaccines will be certified. But WHO certification of Chinese certification is not rubber stamp, whereas the Pfizer and Moderna, they believe their companies did the right job, and then rubber stamp. So
China has a very powerful representation of WHO.
But the rules are there. You have to follow the rule. Yes, I think the Chinese is now getting more influence into the international communities. I think that's true. But again, there are rules already set there, and unless you change the rule.
Could the Victorian or Australian government make it a law that everyone over a certain age has, by law, has to have a vaccination unless they've got some
excuses? Yeah, I don't think so.
The Constitution has wording which prevents.
Okay, so thank you. I don't know that.
Because that was a question I wanted to ask everyone. I'm 72, and when I was a kid in a small New South Wales country town, I thought it was compulsory for everyone to have anti-polio and anti-TB vaccination.
The only time I knew of it being compulsory, my father was in New Guinea during the war, and if he wanted to come home on leave, it was compulsory that we were vaccinated against
Okay, so, but I think our constitution will allow us to make decisions, because that is the difference between the Chinese system and the democratic system. We have much more choice, but unfortunately, some of these choices are not made scientifically. A lot of us make choices based on political ideology rather than scientific principles. I mean, that is one of the issues we need to rectify, because after all, we are talking about our own lives. So it makes sense for you to make up your decision about your own life, but at the same time, you get infected. Your family is also affected, and your neighborhood affected as well. So there is also another issue there which we should look at.
First, the question about our children in our preschool system have to be immunised to go there. And
Yeah, yeah.
So if you don't get immunised, so it's a bit similar to what you were saying about China, is that sort of the employer that's putting the real pressure on if people want to be working effectively in the community.
Yeah.
Effectively, they have to
Get vaccinated. Yeah, I think so.
Could apply
To us as well.
vaccine generally.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I remember my daughter need to be get vaccinated before they can get into 3 years group. Yes, I remember that.
So it's only for preschool.
Preschool, I mean, I don't know how strict the schools are about that, but it's compulsory that children go to school, so they can't refuse them if they haven't been vaccinated.
Yeah, but I know that my dog need to be vaccinated before he can let out of the house.
Does that vary from state to state?
Huh?
Does it vary from state to state?
I don't know. But according to my daughter's vet friend, she's a vet, and she said when we got the dog, actually she and my daughter go and collect the dog from the airport, and tell my daughter don't let the dog out of your house until get the second vaccination. So
I think it depends on the breed of dog. I know that there are some breeds, such as Labradors, that do not need to be vaccinated.
Okay, I don't know, but my dog is a Maltese cross poodle. It's a toy dog.
Well,
it's
whilst I'm online, some time ago, Albert, you promised that you would have a microphone so that those of us online could hear the questions in the room.
Oh, sorry.
I've been at a number of meetings which are like this, a mixture of live and Zoom, and microphone does make a big difference.
Yeah, I actually have a wireless microphone, so I will have to test it out next time.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so
Gilbert, you'd agree?
Okay, thank you. Okay, next time we will be on some 1800s painting about the Chinese cities at that time.